The stranger's hand hovered over the tarnished silver ring like he was reaching toward an open flame, and Wren Thatcher knew, even before he spoke, that she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. £12 is insulting, he said, his accent curling around the words in a way that made her think of old European courts and darker centuries. The craftsmanship alone is worth 10 times that. Wren looked up from the velvet tray at the estate jewelry stall, meeting eyes so pale they were almost colorless in the dim glow of the night market's string lights. The man was tall, impossibly so, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent, and his hair fell white blonde past his collar in a way that should have looked affected but instead looked ancient. His skin had the kind of pallor that spoke of never seeing sunlight, and something in Wren's appraiser training screamed a warning she couldn't quite name. 80 is robbery, she shot back, because she'd learned young that you never let anyone see you flinch. Look at the wear on the band. The stone's been recut at least twice, poorly, and the setting is bent. 12 is generous. The stone, he said softly, still not touching it, is a white sapphire from the Ural Mountains, cut in 1623 by a master whose name you would not recognize, but whose work appears in 3 crown collections. The wear you see is 4 centuries of history. The bent setting saves someone's life once, turning a blade, and the engraving inside the band is a cipher that would take your modern cryptographers 6 months to crack. Wren blinked. She picked up the ring again, tilted it toward the light. There was engraving, yes, but she'd assumed it was decorative. How do you know all that? Because I've been looking for it for a very long time. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a square of black silk, and folded it carefully over his palm. Only then did he extend his hand. May I? The vendor, an elderly woman who'd been watching this exchange with growing unease, nodded. Wren passed the ring over, watched the stranger lift it with the cloth barrier between his skin and the metal. His expression shifted just for a moment into something that looked like grief. Name your price, he said to the vendor, not looking away from the ring. I couldn't possibly sell it to you, the old woman said. Not after I quoted her 12. Bad for business. £200, Wren heard herself say. Final offer. The stranger's gaze snapped to her, and she saw surprise there, and something else. Calculation, maybe, or recognition. You're haggling me up? I'm correcting my appraisal. If what you said is true, 200 is still a steal, but I get first refusal if you're buying it for resale. She had no idea why she'd said that. She dealt in house clearances and insurance valuations, not antique jewelry, but something about the ring, or the man, or the way the night market's shadows seemed to gather around them both, made her want to stay in this story a little longer. I'm not buying it for resale, he said, but I accept your terms. He looked at the vendor. 200. I'll need a receipt and any provenance you have. The old woman hesitated, then nodded and began writing up the sale in a ledger that looked older than the ring itself. The stranger produced a wallet, counted out crisp notes, and waited. When the ring was wrapped and receipted, he tucked it carefully into an inside pocket, still wrapped in silk, and turned back to Wren. You said you get first refusal. That implies you want something. Information, Wren said, about the cipher, and the blade that bent the setting, and why you're handling it like it'll burn you. It will, he said simply. Silver and I are incompatible. As for the rest, that's a longer conversation. Are you free for coffee? Every instinct Wren possessed told her to say no, to walk away from the pale stranger with his impossible knowledge and his careful hands and his accent that belonged to another age. But she'd learned young that the best stories came from terrible decisions, and she'd always been curious about things that could bite. There's a place 3 stalls down that stays open till dawn, she said. But you're buying. His smile was slight, controlled, revealing nothing. Naturally. The coffee stall was tucked beneath the arcade's old customs arch, where the night market's mortal trade gave way to something else. Wren had been coming here for 2 years, ever since she'd started appraising estates for the auction house, and she'd learned not to ask too many questions about the vendors in the back rows who only appeared after midnight, or the goods they sold that seemed to predate cataloging systems. The market had its own rules, its own ecosystem, and if you were polite and paid in cash, you could find anything. The stranger ordered 2 coffees without asking what she wanted, black, no sugar, which was exactly how she took it. Another warning sign. He gestured to a small iron table away from the main flow of foot traffic, set down both cups, and waited until she sat before taking his own seat. "My name is Vasile Petrova," he said, "and before you ask, yes, I'm a vampire. You've been operating in a mixed market for 2 years. I assumed you'd guessed." Wren's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. "I thought that was a metaphor." "No." His expression didn't change. "The vendors in the East Wing deal in blood-safe goods, estate sales from old families, occasionally procurement for those of us who prefer not to be seen in daylight hours. You've been doing appraisals for them without realizing what they were." She thought back over the past 2 years. The antique dealer who'd paid her in gold coins. The woman who'd hired her to value a library. All night work, all leather and vellum and books in languages she couldn't read. The man who'd commissioned an inventory of his collection and warned her not to open any of the locked cases without gloves. "Oh," she said faintly. "Oh, hell." "You're very good at your job," Vasile said. "You don't ask invasive questions, you're fair in your assessments, and you keep your appointments. That's rarer than you'd think. Several of my acquaintances have recommended you." "For what?" Wren managed. "I appraise furniture, jewelry sometimes, books. I'm not—" She stopped, took a breath. "Vampires are real." "Yes, and you're one." "Yes. And you just paid £200 for a ring you can't touch, that you say is 400 years old, that has some kind of cipher inside it." "Yes," Vasile said again. Then, after a pause, "I'm told I should offer reassurance at this juncture. You're not in danger. I don't drink from the unwilling. I'm not going to erase your memory or threaten your family. And if you want to leave right now, I'll let you. But I would prefer you stay, because I need your help, and I'm willing to pay extremely well for it." Wren picked up her coffee, drank half of it in one go, scalding her tongue. The pain felt good, real. "What kind of help?" "The kind that requires mortal hands," Vasile said. "That ring is the lost signet of House Petrova. It's been missing for 73 years. Without it, I can't formally convene the old assembly, which is the governing body for the city's vampire families. The assembly meets every quarter century to renew the treaty that keeps the peace between our world and yours, territorial boundaries, hunting rights, legal protections. The next session is in 3 days. If I don't have that ring, if I can't call the assembly, the treaty lapses." "And then what?" "Chaos," Vasile said quietly. "There are families who never wanted the treaty, who think we should take what we want, that mortals are prey, not partners. There are others who've been waiting for an excuse to settle old feuds without legal oversight. The treaty is the only thing holding the city together, and the only person who can renew it is the one who bears the signet of the founding house. Your house. My house. I'm the king in your terms, though we don't use that title. I'm the first among the families, the treaty keeper. And for 3 days, I thought the signet was gone forever. Then I felt it tonight, when you picked it up. Silver sings when it's close to us. It burns when we touch it. That ring was calling to me from 3 stalls away." Wren set down her cup. Her hands were shaking. "Why can't you just tell the assembly you have it? Show them the receipt." "Because the convocation ritual requires the bearer to wear the ring while reciting the formal summons. I can't wear it. Silver would burn through to bone before I finished the first line. I need someone who can act as my ring bearer, someone I trust, someone who understands the value of what she's holding." "You just met me." "I've had you investigated," Vasile said calmly. "After the 3rd recommendation, I commissioned a background check. You're honest, you're discreet, you're in debt from your mother's medical bills, and you're too proud to ask for help. You're also one of the best appraisers under 30 in the city, which means you understand provenance and authenticity. You're perfect." Wren should have been angry about the investigation. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. At least he wasn't pretending this was chance. "What's the pay?" £50,000 plus expenses. The work will take 3 days, maybe 4. You'll need to stay close to me for most of it, attend several meetings. possibly deal with some unpleasant questions from rival families. There's a small amount of danger, but I'll have security, and you'll be under my protection. 50,000 pounds. Wren did the math automatically. That would clear her mother's debts, cover the next year of treatment, maybe leave enough for Wren to move out of the flat she shared with two strangers who stole her milk. It was life-changing money, which meant there had to be a catch. "What aren't you telling me?" Vasile was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The ring was stolen from me 73 years ago, or rather I pawned it, and the pawnbroker sold it before I could buy it back. I've been searching for it ever since. There are people who know that. People who would very much like to keep me from recovering it, because without it, I'm weakened. If they find out I have the ring again, they'll come for it. Which means they'll come for you." Rival families? One family in particular, Drachesht. They've been arguing for decades that House Petrova has no legitimate claim to the treaty keeper role, that we lost it when we lost the signet. If they knew I'd found it, they'd do anything to take it again before the convocation, and they won't be gentle about it. Wren looked at him, at his too pale skin and his careful hands, and the way he held himself like violence was something he'd set aside, but could pick up again at any moment. "You said small amount of danger." "Comparatively," Vasile said. "I've survived 4 assassination attempts this year. You'd be under my protection, which is better than most security money can buy." "That's not reassuring." "No," he agreed, "but it's honest. I won't lie to you, Wren. Not about the risks, not about what I'm asking. This is dangerous, it's also necessary, and I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe." She should say no. She should walk away, go back to her flat, forget about vampires and treaties and rings that sang in the dark. But 50,000 pounds was more money than she'd see in 5 years of appraisal work. And there was something in Vasile's face, some old grief, that made her think he was telling the truth about everything. "I want half up front," she said, "and a contract, a real one, human legal, that I can enforce if things go sideways." "Agreed. And you tell me everything. No surprises, no sudden revelations about secret enemies or ancient curses. If I'm walking into this, I want the whole story." Vasile inclined his head, a gesture that managed to be both agreement and something older, more formal. "I'll tell you what I can. Some of it is bound by old laws, but I'll be as forthcoming as possible." "Then you have a deal," Wren said, and tried not to think about all the ways this could kill her. They spent the next hour in the coffee stall while Vasile explained the structure of the old assembly, the families who made it up, and the specific danger posed by House Drachesht. He spoke in the calm, measured tones of someone describing a business arrangement, but Wren caught the edges of something darker beneath it. Old anger, old pain, carefully controlled. The assembly consisted of 7 houses, each with its own territory and specialty. Petrova was first among them, the treaty keepers, responsible for maintaining the balance between vampire and mortal worlds. Drachesht was second, but they'd been pushing for primacy for over a century, arguing that Petrova had grown weak, too conciliatory toward mortals. The other 5 houses shifted allegiances depending on the issue, which meant every convocation was a political minefield. "The ring is proof of my authority," Vasile explained. "It bears the seal that all 7 houses agreed to honor when they signed the original treaty in 1621. Whoever holds it can call the assembly into session. Without it, any of the families can claim the treaty is void, that there's no legitimate authority to enforce it. Drachesht has been arguing that position for years, but they've never had enough support. If the treaty actually lapses, though, they'll have the chaos they need to make a real move for power." "And you pawned it," Wren said. "Why?" Vasile's expression closed. "That's one of the things I can't tell you. Not yet. Can't or won't. Both." He met her eyes, and there was nothing cold in his gaze now, just a weariness that looked centuries old. "It's not a secret I've shared with anyone. If I tell you, it becomes a weapon someone could use against me. Against us. I need to trust you more before I risk that." Fair, Wren thought. She'd just met him, and she was about to walk into vampire politics with a price on her head and a ring she couldn't afford to lose. Trust would have to be earned on both sides. "Okay," she said. What's the next step? I need to verify the ring's authenticity. There's a scholar who specializes in historical documentation, lives in the old city. She'll be able to confirm the provenance, cross-reference the cipher. Once we have that, we can start preparing for the convocation. Tonight? Now, Vasile said. The faster we move, the less time Drachesht has to hear rumors and interfere. Can you come with me, or do you need to make arrangements? Wren thought of her flat, her two oblivious roommates, her job at the auction house that barely paid enough to cover rent. She thought of her mother in the long-term care facility, the bills stacking up, the apologetic calls from the finance office. 3 days of danger for £50,000 and a story she'd never be able to tell. I can come, she said, but I want that contract first. Vasile smiled, just slightly. You're wise to insist. There's a notary 3 streets over who keeps night hours. We'll stop there on the way. The notary turned out to be a vampire herself, a tiny woman with silver hair piled in an elaborate knot and spectacles perched on her nose. She listened to Vasile's explanation, drew up a contract in 15 minutes, and had them both sign in front of 2 witnesses who appeared from a back room and disappeared just as quickly. Wren read every line twice before signing, but it was fair. £50,000, half on signing, half on completion of services as ring-bearer, with clauses for medical expenses and hazard pay if things escalated beyond small amount of danger. The notary transferred £25,000 into Wren's account while they waited, tapping away at a computer that looked like it predated the internet. When Wren's phone buzzed with the bank notification, she had to sit down. You look pale, the notary observed, though not as pale as Vasile. Would you like water? I'm fine, Wren managed, just not used to this much money appearing at once. Spend it wisely, the notary said. Vampire contracts are binding in ways mortal ones aren't. If you break your word, the consequences are severe. I wasn't planning to break it. Good. Vasile is one of the decent ones, but decent doesn't mean soft. Don't disappoint him. Vasile, who'd been examining a shelf of leather-bound books, turned back. Are we finished? Finished and filed, the notary confirmed. Try not to get her killed, Vasile. I like her. I'll do my best. Outside, the night market was still in full swing, but the crowd had thinned to the dedicated shoppers and the vendors who only brought out their best goods after 2 in the morning. Vasile led Wren through the arcade, past stalls selling things she recognized: vintage clothing, rare books, antique tools, and things she didn't. Vials of dark liquid, jewelry that seemed to move in the light. A taxidermied crow that watched them pass with eyes that looked too aware. Don't stare, Vasile murmured. Some of them consider it rude. Some of what? The goods. They're not all inanimate. Wren decided not to pursue that line of questioning. They emerged from the arcade into the old city, where the streets narrowed to cobblestones and the buildings leaned together like conspirators. Vasile moved through the shadows with the ease of someone who'd walked these paths 1,000 times, and Wren had to hurry to keep up. The scholar's name is Mirella, Vasile said over his shoulder. She's mortal, mostly, but she's lived long enough to know more about vampire history than most vampires. She's also extremely paranoid, so don't touch anything in her house without permission, and don't repeat anything she says to you. She trades in secrets, and she doesn't like them getting out. Mostly mortal. She's extended her life through methods I don't ask about. Alchemical, probably. She's been old for as long as I've known her, which is 200 years, so whatever she's doing seems to work. They stopped in front of a narrow townhouse wedged between 2 larger buildings, its facade painted deep blue and covered in esoteric symbols that might have been decorative or might have been wards. Vasile knocked, 3 slow beats and 2 fast, and waited. The door opened to reveal a woman who could have been anywhere from 60 to 600, her hair in long silver braids, her face lined with the kind of wrinkles that spoke of constant smiling. She took one look at Vasile, then at Wren, and her eyes widened. You found it, she said. Holy hell, Vasile, you actually found it. May we come in? Yes, of course. Mirella stepped back, ushered them into a hallway so crammed with books and papers that Wren had to turn sideways to fit. I assume you need provenance confirmation and cipher translation. Do you have time for tea, or is this an emergency? Emergency, Vasile said. Drachest doesn't know yet, but they will soon. I need everything you can give me before word spreads. Mirella nodded and led them up a staircase to a workroom that looked like a library had exploded. Every surface was covered in books, scrolls, maps, and artifacts Wren couldn't begin to identify. The scholar cleared a space on a central table, produced a jeweler's loupe and several reference books, and held out her hand. Let me see it. Vasile withdrew the ring, still wrapped in silk, and set it carefully on the table. Mirella unfolded the cloth, lifted the ring with a pair of wooden tongs, and bent over it with the loupe. For 10 minutes, she didn't speak. She examined the band, the stone, the setting, the engraving. She cross-referenced 3 different books, muttering to herself in a language Wren didn't recognize. Finally, she set down the loupe and looked at Vasile. It's genuine, she said. No question. The sapphire is Ural origin, late 16th century. The setting is Romanian silverwork, characteristic of the Wallachia region, circa 1620. The engraving matches the Petrova family cipher from the treaty documents I have on file. Where did you find it? Estate sale, Wren said, because Vasile seemed content to let her answer. Came through a mixed lot at the night market. I was doing appraisals. Mirella looked at her with new interest. You're the appraiser the night vendors have been talking about. Thorough, fair, doesn't steal. Good reputation in a bad market. Thank you? It's a compliment. Most mortals who work the night market end up corrupted or dead within a year. You've lasted 2, and people trust you. That's remarkable. She turned back to Vasile. You chose well. She'll need protection, though. Once Drachest hears she's your ring-bearer, they'll target her first. I'm aware, Vasile said. I've already arranged security. Not enough, Mirella said flatly. Drachest plays dirty. They'll send assassins, saboteurs, maybe even try to buy her off. You need to keep her close. Ideally, she stays with you until after the convocation. Wren opened her mouth to protest, but Vasile spoke first. I have a secure residence. She's welcome to stay as long as necessary. I have a flat, Wren said, and a job. I can't just disappear for 3 days. You can if the alternative is dying, Mirella said cheerfully. Drachesti's last 3 assassination attempts involved car bombs, poisoned contracts, and a sniper. They don't value subtlety. If they find out where you live, they'll come for you there, and your flatmates will be collateral damage. Wren felt cold. You said small amount of danger. Comparatively, Vasile said again. I meant compared to the danger I face regularly. I should have been clearer. I'm sorry. He sounded genuinely apologetic, which somehow made it worse. Wren looked at the ring on the table, the tarnished silver band that was apparently worth her life, and tried to think practically. She had £25,000 in her bank account. She could call her boss, claim a family emergency, take a week off. She could text her flatmates that she was staying with a friend. 3 days in a secure location with a vampire king who needed her hands, and then this would be over and she could go back to her normal life, assuming she survived. Okay, she said. I'll stay with you, but I need to make some calls first, and I want details on this security you've arranged. Fair, Vasile said. He looked at Mirella. Can you translate the cipher tonight? I can try. It'll take a few hours. You two should eat something or whatever it is you do for sustenance. Come back at dawn, and I'll have what I can. Thank you, Mirella. Don't thank me. Just don't get killed before the convocation. I've got money riding on you keeping your throne. Outside, the sky had started to lighten at the edges, that thin gray that came before true dawn. Vasile walked quickly now, leading Wren through a maze of back streets to a black car that had been waiting in a narrow alley. The driver was another vampire, pale and silent, who nodded to Vasile and opened the back door without speaking. This is Anton, Vasile said as they slid into the car. He's been with my household for 90 years. You can trust him. Anton pulled into traffic with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd been driving since before traffic lights were invented. Wren fumbled with her phone, sent quick texts to her flatmates and her boss, and tried not to think too hard about what she'd just agreed to. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My residence," Vasile said. "It's outside the city center, more defensible. You'll have your own room, full access to the household, anything you need. The staff is used to mortal guests, so you won't be the first." "Do you have a lot of mortal guests?" "Not often, but I employ several mortals in various capacities. My daylight manager is human, as are most of the household staff. We've found it works better that way, fewer complications with sleep schedules." The car climbed into the hills above the city, where the old estate sprawled behind stone walls and iron gates. Anton turned into a drive marked only by a subtle bronze plaque, and the gates opened automatically. The house beyond was not quite a mansion, but close, all dark stone and tall windows, surrounded by gardens that looked professionally maintained. "Home," Vasile said simply. Inside, the house was exactly what Wren had expected from a vampire king. Antique furniture, dark wood paneling, artwork that probably belonged in museums. But it was also surprisingly comfortable, with soft rugs and warm lighting, and a faint smell of old books and beeswax polish. A woman appeared in the hallway, middle-aged and brisk, and Vasile introduced her as Petra, the household manager. "Petra, this is Wren Thatcher. She'll be staying with us for the next few days as my ring-bearer. Please make up the blue room and see that she has everything she needs." Petra looked Wren up and down, nodded approvingly, and smiled. "Welcome, Miss Thatcher. Breakfast in an hour?" "Yes, please," Wren said faintly. Vasile touched her elbow, gentle. "I'll show you to your room. We have a few hours before we need to return to Mirella. You should rest." The blue room turned out to be a suite, with a bedroom, a sitting area, and a bathroom that had both a clawfoot tub and a modern shower. Everything was decorated in shades of blue and cream, elegant and restful, and the bed looked like something from a luxury hotel. Wren stood in the middle of it all and tried to process the last 6 hours. "There's a lock on the door," Vasile said from the threshold. "Use it if it makes you feel safer. No one will enter without your permission. Petra will bring breakfast shortly. If you need anything, there's a phone on the desk that connects to the household line." "Thank you," Wren said. Then, because he was being so careful, so correct, "I'm not afraid of you." "You should be," Vasile said quietly. "Not because I'd hurt you, but because you're in danger now, and it's my fault. I'm sorry for that. I chose this. You chose it without knowing the full risks. That's on me." He hesitated, then added, "I'll keep you safe, Wren. I promise." He left before she could answer, closing the door softly behind him. Wren locked it anyway, more out of habit than fear, and collapsed onto the bed. Her phone buzzed with a message from her boss. "Take all the time you need." Her flatmate had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Her mother's care facility wouldn't call for another week. She had £25,000 in her account, a vampire king's promise of protection, and a silver ring that might get her killed. It was, objectively, the worst decision she'd ever made. But when Petra knocked an hour later with a breakfast tray of eggs and toast and coffee that smelled like heaven, Wren felt oddly calm. She'd been appraising estates for 2 years, walking through dead people's lives, putting prices on their memories. This was just another kind of appraisal. Figure out what the ring was worth, who wanted it, and how to keep it safe until the convocation. She could do this, probably. When she finished eating, Wren showered, changed into clean clothes that Petra had somehow procured in her exact size, and went looking for Vasile. She found him in a study lined with books, seated at a desk covered in papers, looking like he hadn't moved in the hour since they'd arrived. "Can't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. "I don't sleep much during the day. My schedule is inverted. I'm most alert at night, but I can rest if needed." He looked up from the papers, and his expression softened slightly. "Did you eat?" "Yes, Petra's efficient. She's been managing this household for 30 years. I'd be lost without her." He set down his pen. "We should head back to Mirella soon, but there's something I want to show you first." He led her down a hallway to a locked door, which he opened with a key from his pocket. Beyond was a room Wren immediately recognized as an archive. Temperature-controlled, organized shelving, rows of document boxes and artifact cases. Vasile went to one case, unlocked it, and withdrew a leather folder. "The original treaty," he said, laying it on the examination table. "Signed in 1621 by all 7 houses. Look at the seals at the bottom." Wren bent over the parchment, careful not to touch it. The document was written in a mix of Latin and an older language she didn't recognize, but the seals were clear. 7 wax impressions, each bearing a different family crest. The first was a stylized falcon, wings spread. Petrova. "The ring seal matches this one," Vasile said, pointing to the falcon. "That's how the convocation works. The bearer presses the ring into wax to mark the summons as legitimate. Without the physical ring, there's no way to prove authority. It's archaic, but that's the point. Traditions protect us from chaos." "Why hasn't anyone made a copy?" "They've tried, but the ring carries a very old enchantment blood magic bound when the treaty was first signed. Only the true ring will leave an impression that the other houses recognize. Forgeries melt or crack or mark badly. It's impossible to duplicate." Wren studied the seal, memorizing the details. "When you pawned it, did you think you'd never get it back?" Vasile was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I thought I'd have more time. The pawnbroker was someone I trusted or thought I did. He promised to hold it for 6 months while I raised the funds to buy it back. But he sold it after 3 weeks, and by the time I found out, the buyer had disappeared. I've been tracking it ever since. 73 years of following leads, buying up estate sales, bribing informants. I'd almost given up." "Why did you pawn it in the first place?" "Because someone I loved was in danger, and the ransom was more than I had in accessible funds. I thought I was making a trade, the ring for a life. But the ransom arrived too late. She died anyway, and I lost both." The grief in his voice was so raw that Wren looked away, giving him privacy. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Doesn't sound like it." Vasile closed the folder carefully, returned it to the case. "Grief doesn't fade the way people think it does. It just becomes part of you. You learn to carry it." Wren thought of her mother, the slow decline, the medical bills that kept coming. "Yeah," she said. "You do." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of old sorrows filling the space between them. Then Vasile locked the case and gestured toward the door. "We should go. Mirella will have the translation ready." The drive back to the old city was quieter, both of them lost in thought. Anton navigated the morning traffic with the same silent efficiency, and by the time they reached Mirella's townhouse, the sun was fully up, bright and harsh. Vasile pulled on gloves and a wide-brimmed hat before stepping out of the car, and Wren noticed the way he moved quickly from the car to the shadowed doorway. "Sunlight?" she asked. "Not immediately fatal, but unpleasant, like standing too close to a fire. I can manage brief exposure, but I prefer not to." Mirella let them in, looking tired but triumphant. "I've got your translation. Come see." The workroom table was now covered in reference materials and a handwritten sheet in Mirella's cramped script. She pointed to the ring, which sat in a velvet-lined box, and to her notes. "The cipher is a variation on a visionaire square, keyed to a phrase in Old Romanian. It took me 3 hours to crack, but here's what it says." She slid the paper across to Vasile. "It's a message. From you, I assume, to yourself. Written when you first commissioned the ring." Vasile read it in silence, and Wren watched his face go still. Whatever the message said, it hit him hard. "Thank you, Mirella," he said finally. "This is invaluable." "Want to share with the class?" Mirella asked. "It's personal." He folded the paper, tucked it into his jacket. "But it confirms the ring's authenticity beyond any doubt. That's what matters." Mirella looked at Wren, rolled her eyes in a way that clearly said men, and handed over a second sheet of paper. "I also did some research on Dreshecht. They've been quiet for the past month, which is unusual. Normally they're all over the political scene, making noise, stirring up trouble. The fact that they've gone silent suggests they're planning something big." "Wonderful," Vasile said dryly. "Do you have any intel on what?" "Not specifics, but I have a contact in their household, a mortal servant who feeds me information occasionally. I'll reach out, see what I can learn. In the meantime, watch your back, and hers." She nodded at Wren. Drachesht won't hesitate to use her as leverage. I'm aware. They left Mirella's house with more questions than answers, and Wren could feel the tension rolling off Vasile in waves. Whatever the cipher had said, it had shaken him. But she didn't press. If he wanted to tell her, he would. Back at the house, Vasile disappeared into his study, and Wren spent the afternoon exploring. The library was extensive, full of books in languages she couldn't read, and a few in English that looked promising. She found a volume on vampire history, settled into a chair by the window, and started reading. It was dry stuff, academic, but it filled in gaps. Vampires had been part of human civilization for millennia, living in the shadows, forming their own governments and laws. The treaty system was relatively modern, dating back to the Enlightenment, when both sides had decided that open warfare was inefficient. Better to divide territory, establish rules, and coexist. Most cities had some version of the assembly, governing bodies that kept the peace. But the peace was fragile. Wren read about uprisings, betrayals, families that had been wiped out for breaking the treaty. It was a brutal world, held together by tradition and fear in equal measure. When Petra brought her tea in the late afternoon, Wren asked, "How long have you worked for Vasile?" 30 years, Petra said. "Since my husband died, I needed work, and Vasile needed a daylight manager. It's been a good arrangement." "Do you ever worry about the danger?" Petra smiled. "Every job has risks. At least here I know what they are. Vasile is fair, he pays well, and he protects his people. I've seen him face down assassins to keep the household safe. That's more than most employers would do. Have there been a lot of assassins?" 4 this year, like he said, but that's politics. Goes with the territory when you're a king. She poured the tea, set out biscuits. "You're safe here, Miss Thatcher. Don't worry." Wren wanted to believe her, but as the sun set and Vasile emerged from his study, looking grim, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was just beginning. "Mirella's contact came through," Vasile said without preamble. "Drachesht knows I have the ring. They're planning to move against us before the convocation. We need to accelerate the timeline." "How do they know?" "Someone at the night market must have talked, or they have informants in places I didn't expect. Either way, we're out of time. The convocation is in 2 days. I need to start the formal summons tonight." "What does that involve?" "You, wearing the ring, reciting the summons in front of witnesses from each of the 7 houses. It's a ceremonial process, very specific. I've arranged for the witnesses to meet us at the assembly hall in 3 hours. We'll do the summons, seal it, and then prepare for the convocation itself. And Drachesht will try to stop us. I've called in reinforcement security from the other houses who are loyal to the treaty. But it's going to be dangerous. If you want to back out, now is the time." Wren thought about it, really thought about it. She could take the £25,000 she'd already been paid, walk away, go back to her normal life. Vasile wouldn't blame her, but she'd signed a contract, and more than that, she'd seen the grief in his eyes when he talked about the person he'd lost. She'd heard the way he spoke about the treaty, the fragile peace. This mattered. To him, and maybe to more people than she realized. "I'm not backing out," she said. "Just tell me what to do." The assembly hall was in the deep old city, beneath street level, hidden behind a facade that looked like a derelict warehouse. Vasile led Wren down a flight of stone stairs, through a door guarded by 2 vampires who nodded respectfully, and into a space that took her breath away. The hall was circular, carved from stone, with a domed ceiling painted in frescoes that depicted battles and treaties and moments of history Wren didn't recognize. 7 chairs sat in a circle at the center, each one marked with a family crest. At the very middle was a raised dais, with a lectern and a wax seal kit. "This is where the assembly meets," Vasile said softly. "It hasn't been used in 25 years. The last convocation renewed the treaty before I took leadership. Now it's my turn." Witnesses were already arriving. Representatives from each of the 7 houses, dressed in formal attire that ranged from modern suits to historical coats that looked like museum pieces. They greeted Vasile with varying degrees of warmth, and Wren caught the undercurrents of tension, alliances shifting, old grudges barely concealed. Dracheshti's representative was the last to arrive, a woman with white hair braided into a crown, her eyes cold and assessing. She looked at Wren like she was livestock. "This is your ring-bearer?" she said to Vasile. "A mortal child?" "This is Wren Thatcher," Vasile said evenly, "and she's of age, capable, and under my protection. If you have objections, Lucia, voice them now." Lucia's smile was sharp. "No objections, just curiosity. It's rare to see a mortal trusted with such responsibility. I hope she understands the honor." "I understand the contract," Wren said before she could stop herself, "and the pay. That's enough." Lucia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Pragmatic, I like that. Very well. Let's see if she can manage the summons without fainting." The ceremony itself was simpler than Wren had expected. Vasile handed her the ring, and she slid it onto her finger, feeling the cold weight of the silver. He gave her a card with the summons written in phonetic script, and she read it aloud, her voice echoing in the domed space. "By the seal of House Petrova, first among the families, I call the old assembly to convene. Let the 7 houses gather under the terms of the treaty to renew the bonds that keep the peace, to honor the old laws, and to speak with one voice. Let this summons be witnessed and sealed." Vasile handed her a stick of red wax and a candle. Wren melted the wax onto a piece of parchment, pressed the ring into it, and watched the falcon crest take shape, perfect and clear. The witnesses murmured approval. Even Lucia nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. "The summons is valid," Vasile announced. "The assembly will convene in 2 nights at the dark of the moon. All houses are bound to attend." Lucia stepped forward, her gaze locked on the ring. "May I examine the seal?" "You may look," Vasile said, "but you will not touch." Lucia bent over the parchment, studying the wax impression. For a long moment she was silent. Then she straightened and said, "It's genuine. I'll inform my house. We'll attend the convocation." She left without another word, and the other witnesses followed, until Wren and Vasile were alone in the hall. Wren slid the ring off her finger, passed it back to Vasile, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That went better than I expected," she said. "That was the easy part," Vasile replied. "Now Drachesh knows for certain that we have the ring and that the convocation is happening. They'll make their move soon." "How soon?" "Tonight if they're smart, tomorrow at the latest. We need to get you back to the house." They made it halfway to the car before the attack came. The assassins were waiting in the alley, 3 of them, moving with the inhuman speed that marked them as vampires. Wren saw the flash of silver blades and realized with sick clarity what Morella had meant about Drachesh playing dirty. Vasile shoved Wren behind him, moving to intercept the first attacker. But the second one feinted left, drawing him off, and the third came straight for Wren, silver knife gleaming. She didn't think, just reacted. Grabbed the knife from her pocket, the little folding blade she carried for opening boxes, and slashed at the assassin's face. It was a desperate, clumsy move, but it connected, and the vampire hissed and stumbled back. Anton appeared from nowhere, moving faster than Wren's eyes could follow, and tackled the assassin to the ground. Vasile had the other 2 pinned, his hands around their throats, his expression cold and merciless. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The assassins didn't answer. One of them twisted, brought up a silver blade, and drove it toward Vasile's chest. Wren screamed a warning, but Vasile was already moving, catching the blade with his bare hand. The silver burned, smoke rising from his palm, but he didn't let go. Just twisted the knife free and drove it into the assassin's shoulder. "I asked you a question." "Drachesh," the assassin gasped. "Lucia's orders. She wants the ring. She can't have it." Vasile released the assassin, who collapsed, and turned to Wren. "Are you hurt?" "No. You are." She pointed to his hand, where the silver burn had left a black, blistered mark. "It'll heal. Come on, we need to move." Anton had subdued the third assassin, binding all 3 with zip ties and silver-laced cuffs that made them writhe. Vasile made a quick call, and within minutes, reinforcements arrived, more vampires loyal to House Petrova, who hauled the assassins away for questioning. In the car, Wren's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd just been attacked by vampires. She'd fought back with a pocket knife. None of this felt real. "You did well," Vasile said quietly. Most mortals freeze the first time. You didn't. I didn't do anything. You and Anton handled it. You bought yourself time. That's what matters. He looked at his burned hand, flexing the fingers. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry you got hurt protecting me. That's my job, Vasile said. As long as you're my ring bearer, your safety is my responsibility. Wren looked at him, at the way he held his injured hand carefully, the way his jaw was tight with pain he wouldn't acknowledge. She thought about the way he'd stepped between her and the assassins without hesitation, the way he'd burned himself on silver to keep her safe. You meant it, she said. When you said you'd protect me, I always mean what I say. Back at the house, Petra fussed over them both, bringing clean clothes for Wren and medical supplies for Vasile. The burn on his hand was ugly, but Petra cleaned and bandaged it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. You need to feed, Petra said bluntly. You won't heal properly otherwise. I'll manage, Vasile said. No, you won't. I'll call the service, have someone sent over. Not tonight. I don't want strangers in the house while Wren is here. Petra gave him a long look, then sighed. Your choice, but you're being stubborn. After she left, Wren asked, What service? Blood service. Mortals who donate for pay. It's legal, regulated, safer than hunting. Vasile leaned back in his chair, looking tired. I don't drink from the unwilling, and I don't keep personal donors. Too much risk of attachment or exploitation. The service is clinical, transactional. It works. But you need to feed. Yes, but not tonight. I'll be fine until after the convocation. Wren studied him, the pallor of his skin, the careful way he moved. He was hurt and hungry, and he was refusing help because he didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. It was idiotic and noble in equal measure. If you die because you're too stubborn to eat, I'm going to be really annoyed, she said. I still have 25,000 pounds to earn. Vasile's laugh was unexpected, a brief flash of humor. I won't die. I've survived worse. That's not reassuring. No, he agreed, but it's true. They spent the rest of the night in the study, going over the convocation procedures and what Wren would need to do. It was mostly ceremonial. She'd wear the ring during the opening ritual, stand beside Vasile as he presided over the treaty renewal, and keep the signet safe until the final seal was pressed. Simple, in theory, but the undercurrents were dangerous. If Drachesh tried anything during the convocation, it would be chaos. Lucia will push for a formal challenge, Vasile explained. She'll argue that I'm unfit to lead, that the treaty should be renegotiated. She won't win, the other houses won't support her, not openly. But she'll make noise, and noise creates opportunities for sabotage. What kind of sabotage? Anything from procedural delays to outright violence. The assembly hall is neutral ground, so open attacks are forbidden, but accidents happen. Poisoned wine, structural failures, sudden fires. It's happened before. That's insane. That's politics. Wren rubbed her eyes, exhausted. How do you live like this? Carefully. Vasile set down the papers he'd been reviewing. You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. You should feed. I'll manage. Vasile. She waited until he looked at her. I signed a contract. I agreed to help you. That includes not letting you starve because you're trying to be polite. Call the service, or tell me what you need, but don't be stupid. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You're very pragmatic. I'm an appraiser. Everything has a value. Everything has a cost. You need blood to heal. That's a fact. Deal with it. Vasile smiled, just slightly. All right, I'll call the service, but you don't have to watch. I'm not squeamish. It's not about squeamishness. It's about privacy. Feeding is intimate, even when it's transactional. I'd prefer to keep that separate. Fair, Wren thought. She nodded and stood. I'll be in my room. Call if you need anything. She left him in the study and retreated to the blue suite, where she collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. Her life had become unrecognizable in less than 48 hours. 2 days ago, she'd been appraising furniture and arguing with vendors over estate jewelry. Now she was living with a vampire king, dodging assassins, and preparing to preside over a political ceremony that could determine the fate of an entire city. It was absurd. It was terrifying. And somehow, she didn't want to leave. She thought about Vasile, the way he'd burned his hand on silver to protect her, the way he'd looked when he talked about the person he'd lost. There was something in him that called to her, a loneliness that matched her own. She'd spent so long being practical, keeping her head down, focusing on survival. But here, in this strange and dangerous world, she felt more alive than she had in years. When she finally slept, she dreamed of silver rings and wax seals, and a pale stranger with eyes like winter. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Petra brought Wren formal attire for the convocation, a dress in deep blue, elegant and understated, with a high collar and long sleeves that looked both modern and timeless. Vasile spent hours in meetings with the other houses, securing alliances and shoring up support. Wren sat in on a few of them, watching the way vampire politics worked, the careful dance of promises and threats. By evening, the tension in the house was palpable. The convocation was set for midnight, and every minute that passed felt like walking toward a cliff edge. Vasile found Wren in the library, staring at a book she wasn't reading. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Nervous," she admitted. "This is bigger than I thought." "You can still walk away." "I know, but I won't." She set down the book, looked at him. "Why did you really pawn the ring? You said it was a ransom, but you didn't say who you were ransoming." Vasile was quiet. Then he sat down across from her, and the grief in his eyes was so raw it hurt to see. "Her name was Sarah," he said. "She was my ward, a young vampire I'd taken in after her family was killed in a purge. I raised her, taught her, loved her like a daughter. When she was taken by a rival faction, they demanded the ring as ransom. I thought I could buy it back later, that her life mattered more than a symbol. But they killed her anyway, and the pawnbroker sold the ring before I could recover it. I lost everything that mattered in one night." "I'm so sorry," Wren whispered. The cipher in the ring. The message Morella translated it was something I'd written when I first had it made. A reminder to myself, protect what matters, even at the cost of power. I forgot that. I chose the symbol over the person, and she died. I've been trying to make up for it ever since. Wren reached across the space between them, took his hand, the one that wasn't bandaged, and held it. "You're doing that now, by protecting the treaty, by protecting me. It's not the same." "No, but it's something." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the weight of old sorrows and new fears pressing down. Then Vasile stood, gently disengaging. "We should go," he said. "It's time." The assembly hall was crowded when they arrived, every seat filled. Representatives from all 7 houses gathered in formal array. The air was thick with tension, and Wren could feel the eyes on her as she walked to the center dais beside Vasile. She wore the ring on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath the high collar of her dress, and the weight of it felt like an anchor. Vasile took his place at the lectern, and the hall fell silent. "I call this assembly to order," he said, his voice carrying through the space. "Under the terms of the treaty signed in 1621, we gather to renew the bonds that keep the peace between our world and the mortal realm. Let the 7 houses speak, and let the treaty be honored." One by one, the representatives stood and gave their assent. It was a formality, scripted and ancient, but it mattered. Each house pledging to uphold the treaty, to respect the boundaries, to maintain the fragile balance. When it came to Drachesht, Lucia stood and said, "House Drachesht acknowledges the treaty, but we call for a formal review of leadership. House Petrova has failed in its duties. The signet was lost for 73 years. How can we trust a king who cannot protect his own seal?" Murmurs rippled through the hall. Vasile's expression didn't change. "The signet was recovered," he said calmly. "It is here, authenticated, and in the care of my ring-bearer. The loss was my failure, yes, but I have corrected it. If you wish to challenge my leadership, Lucia, do so formally. Otherwise, acknowledge the treaty and sit down." Lucia's eyes narrowed. I challenge. The hall went dead silent. A formal challenge meant a trial, witnesses, possibly even a duel. It was rare, dangerous, and could tear the assembly apart. On what grounds? Vasile asked. Incompetence, negligence, failure to protect the interests of the vampire nation. You've grown soft, Vasile, too sympathetic to mortals, too willing to compromise. We need a leader who will put our people first. And you believe that's you? I believe it's anyone but you. Vasile looked at her for a long moment, and Wren could see the calculation in his eyes. He could accept the challenge, fight it out, risk everything on a political battle. Or he could do something else. Very well, he said. I accept your challenge, but I propose a different test, not a duel of strength or political maneuvering. A test of commitment. You claim I've failed the vampire nation. I claim you've never understood what it means to serve. Let's see who's right. What are you proposing? Lucia asked warily. A binding, the old kind. You and I both swear an oath to uphold the treaty, enforced by blood magic. If either of us breaks it, we forfeit our position and our life. Let the assembly witness, and let the oath be sealed. The hall erupted. A binding was ancient, deadly serious. It couldn't be undone, and breaking it meant death. It was the kind of thing that hadn't been used in centuries. Lucia looked stunned. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You say I've failed. Prove it. Take the oath with me and let the magic decide. Lucia hesitated, and in that hesitation, Wren saw fear. Real fear, because Lucia knew she couldn't match Vasile's commitment. She'd been bluffing, pushing for power without believing her own accusations, and Vasile had called her on it. I withdraw my challenge, Lucia said finally. Acknowledged, Vasile said. How Strachesht, do you acknowledge the treaty? Lucia sat down, her expression murderous. We acknowledge. The rest of the convocation proceeded smoothly. The treaty was renewed, the seals pressed, the formalities observed. By the time it ended, Wren's legs were shaking from standing so long, but it was done. The peace would hold for another 25 years. Outside, as they walked to the car, Vasile let out a long breath. That was closer than I would have liked, he said. You gambled, Wren said. You bet she wouldn't take the oath. I knew she wouldn't. Lucia wants power, but she doesn't want responsibility. The oath would have bound her to the treaty, and she's been planning to undermine it for years. She couldn't accept without destroying her own plans. And if she'd called your bluff, it wasn't a bluff. I would have taken the oath. I'm already bound to the treaty in every way that matters. The magic would just make it official. Wren looked at him, at the way he stood so straight despite the exhaustion, the way he'd faced down a room full of predators with nothing but words and will. You're terrifying, you know that? So, I've been told. Back at the house, the tension finally broke. Petra had prepared a celebratory dinner, actual food for Wren, a bottle of donor blood for Vasile, and they ate in the dining room, the weight of the past few days lifting. So what happens now? Wren asked. The convocation is over. The treaty is renewed. Do I just go home? You could, Vasile said. The contract is fulfilled. I owe you the second half of the payment, and you're free to leave whenever you'd like. But I'd like you to stay, not as an employee, as a guest, or, he hesitated, as something else, if you're interested. Wren's heart did something complicated. Something else? I'm not good at this, Vasile said. I haven't let anyone close in decades, but you've seen me at my worst, and you didn't run. You argued with me about money, you stood between me and assassins, you called me out when I was being stubborn. I like you, Wren, more than I expected to, and if you feel even a fraction of that, I'd like to see where it goes. Wren set down her fork, her hands trembling. You're a vampire king. I'm an estate appraiser who lives in a flat with 2 strangers and can barely pay my bills. I don't care about any of that. I'm mortal, you're not. That's a pretty significant incompatibility. It is, Vasile agreed. But it's not insurmountable. There are options, if you wanted them. Ways to extend a mortal life, or even change it. But that's far in the future. Right now, I'm just asking if you'd like to have dinner with me again. Maybe see a show, take a walk. Normal things. Normal, Wren repeated, laughing. "Nothing about this is normal." "No," Vasile said, smiling. "But it could be good." Wren thought about it, about the past few days, the danger and the fear and the moments of unexpected connection, about the way Vasile looked at her, like she mattered, like she was more than just a transaction. She thought about the ring, the treaty, the fragile peace they'd fought to protect. "Okay," she said. "Let's try." They took it slow. Wren moved out of her flat she could afford better now, with £50,000 in her account, and into a small house in the hills, close enough to Vasile's estate that they could see each other easily. She kept her job at the auction house, but shifted her focus to night appraisals, working the market she now understood in a whole new way. Vasile courted her with old-fashioned care. Flowers that appeared on her doorstep, invitations to gallery openings and concerts, long conversations over coffee that stretched into dawn. He told her stories of his long life, the centuries he'd lived, the changes he'd seen. She told him about her mother, her childhood, the way she'd learned to appraise value in a world that often missed it. They fell in love slowly, carefully, like two people who'd been hurt before and were learning to trust again. 6 months after the convocation, Vasile took Wren back to the assembly hall. It was empty now, just the two of them in the circular space, and he led her to the center dais where she'd first worn the ring. "I have something to ask you," he said, "and I need you to think about it carefully before you answer." Wren's heart raced. "Okay. The treaty is stable, the city is at peace, but the work isn't done. There will be another convocation in 25 years, and another after that, and I'll need a ring-bearer for all of them. The role is permanent, passed down through generations or held by one person if they choose. I want that person to be you." "Vasile, let me finish. Being a ring-bearer means giving up silver, completely. You can't wear it, touch it, work with it. It's a sacrifice, and I won't ask you to make it lightly. But it also means you'd be part of the treaty, part of the structure that keeps the peace. You'd have a role, a purpose, a place in this world that most mortals never see, and you'd have me for as long as you wanted." Wren looked at him, at the hope and fear in his eyes. "What about turning? You said there were ways." "There are, but I won't offer that unless you ask for it. Turning someone is a huge responsibility, and it changes everything. I'd only do it if you were certain. And even then, I'd want you to live as a mortal for a while first, to be sure." "How long is a while?" 10 years, 20. However long it takes for you to be absolutely sure you want this life. I'm not going anywhere, Wren. I have time." She thought about it, about the life she'd built in the past 6 months, the work she loved, the community she'd found in the night market, about Vasile, who'd become her best friend and her partner and the person she trusted most in the world. About the ring, the weight of it, the history. "I want to do this," she said, "not just for you, for me. Because it matters. Because I've spent my whole life putting value on other people's things, and this is something I can value for myself." Vasile's smile was brilliant, unguarded. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to train other ring-bearers, mortals who can do this work, who can be part of the treaty structure. We can't rely on one person forever. There should be a whole order, people who understand the role and can step in if needed." "I think that's brilliant. And I want to keep appraising. Not full-time, but enough to stay sharp. I like the work. I'm good at it." "Agreed." "And," Wren said, stepping closer, "I want you to kiss me, because we've been doing this slow, careful courtship for 6 months, and I'm ready for more." Vasile laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was everything she'd imagined, gentle and fierce, ancient and new, full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Vasile said, "There's one more thing, the ring. I want you to wear it, not on a chain, properly, as my ring-bearer and my partner." He drew the silver ring from his pocket, still wrapped in silk, and held it out. Wren took it, slid it onto her finger, and felt the weight of history settle around her. "It fits," she said, surprised. "It was made to fit the one who needed it most," Vasile said. "I think it's been waiting for you." Over the next year, Wren built the Order of Ring-Bearers, recruiting mortals who worked in the night market, who understood the balance between worlds. She trained them in the rituals, the history, the responsibilities. Vasile supported her every step, providing resources in space and the kind of patient guidance that came from centuries of leadership. The order grew slowly but steadily. By the time the next crisis came, a rogue vampire faction trying to break the treaty. There were 5 trained ring-bearers ready to help. Wren coordinated the response, working with Vasile and the Assembly to shut down the threat before it escalated. It was dangerous work, but it was also deeply satisfying. 10 years after the convocation, on the anniversary of the night they'd met, Vasile asked Wren if she wanted to be turned. They were in the gardens of his estate, watching the stars through the trees, and the question hung in the cool night air. "I've been thinking about it," Wren said. "A lot, and I think I'm ready. But I want to see the order established first. I want to know it'll continue without me, that there are people who can carry on the work." "How long do you need?" 5 more years. Maybe 10, however long it takes to train the next generation properly. "I can wait," Vasile said. "I've waited this long. A few more years won't hurt. You're very patient. I'm in love with you. That makes patience easy." Wren leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of him, the cool touch of his hand in hers. "I love you too, more than I thought possible." They were married a year later in a quiet ceremony at the assembly hall, witnessed by the 7 houses and the ring-bearers Wren had trained. It was a blending of traditions, vampire and mortal, old and new. Petra cried. Morella gave a toast that was equal parts bawdy and profound. Lucia, who'd grudgingly accepted the new order, even offered her congratulations. Wren wore the silver ring on her right hand and a band of gold on her left, a compromise that let her keep her role as ring-bearer while marking her marriage. Vasile wore a matching gold band, the first time in his long life he'd made that kind of commitment. 15 years after the night market, Wren stood in the assembly hall again, this time to invest her successor as head ring-bearer. The woman was young, sharp, and deeply committed to the work. Wren trusted her completely. "The order is yours now," Wren said, passing over the ceremonial ledger that held the records and rituals. "Guard it well." "I will," the woman promised. "Thank you for building this." Wren smiled. "Thank you for continuing it." That night, she and Vasile stood on the balcony of their home, watching the sun rise through smoked glass. The turning was scheduled for the following week, and Wren felt ready. Not afraid, just ready. She'd lived a full mortal life, built something that mattered, loved and been loved in return. The next chapter would be different, but it would be good. "Any regrets?" Vasile asked, his arm around her waist. "Not one," Wren said. She held up her right hand, where the silver ring still sat, and watched the light catch the white sapphire. "I haggled you up to 200 pounds, you know. Best investment I ever made." Vasile laughed, the sound warm and free. "I'd have paid 10 times that. 20, whatever it took." "I know," Wren said, "but I'm glad I made you work for it." They stood together in the growing light, mortal and immortal, ring-bearer and king, watching the city wake below them. The treaty held, the peace endured, and in the space between 2 worlds, they'd found something rare and precious, a love that would last lifetimes. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Wren thought of the night market, the tarnished ring, the stranger who'd argued over its value with an accent she couldn't place. She thought of all the moments since, the danger and the joy and the slow, steady building of a life. She'd come to the market looking for estate jewelry and found a kingdom. She'd haggled over 12 pounds and gained everything. And as Vasile pulled her back inside, away from the brightening day, Wren knew she'd make the same choice again, every time, in every life. The story that had started with a silver ring and a stranger's voice had become her own. And it was, in every way that mattered, exactly what she'd been searching for.